Racism in the U.S. continues to run far more deeply than we would like to think.
And wherever racism is found, it needs to be rooted out.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here is your host and moderator.
Welcome, viewers. Thank you for joining us today. We are pleased you are here. My name is Andrea Luxton. I am the president of Andrews University in Berrien Springs, Michigan, and I am today's moderator. We have an important topic for conversation, but before we get into that, I'd like you to meet our panelists.
Hi, I'm Tom Plumley. I'm the senior minister at First Christian Church in Fort Worth, Texas. We're a part of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ.
Hi, I'm Dan Levin. I'm the senior rabbi at Temple Bethel in Boca Raton, Florida.
Hi, I'm Carl Troval. I'm professor of ethics and history at Concordia University in Austin, Texas.
My name is Mel Robeck. I'm senior professor of church history and ecumenics and special assistant to the president for ecumenical relations at Fuller Theological Seminary. I'm also an ordained minister of the Assemblies of God.
Thank you very much to our panelists for being here today. As you heard from our opening comments, today we are going to be talking about the difficult topic of racism. For decades, the United States has addressed issues around racism. At some levels, it has succeeded. The most recent scandal in the Los Angeles City Council, however, points to a reality that is much different. While the council claims to oppose racism, the president of the council, 2 other Latino council members, and a labor union leader were caught through a secret recording disparaging African, Mexican, Korean, Armenian, Jewish, and indigenous Americans in a meeting. The fallout from this conversation, intended to be off the record, has had significant consequences for those named, but even more so for the voting public. This incident points to the underlying fact that racism appears to thrive just below the surface in our nation. We ask our panelists today to reflect on the subject of this incipient or underlying racism by considering the following questions. Does the U.S. have an incipient or underlying racism problem, or is this merely a localized issue? If racism grows from underlying attitudes, how best can we hope to address those attitudes? And what do your faith communities have to offer that can change the attitudes that underlie verbal expressions of racism, which inevitably later lead to acts of racism? Let's go back to those that started our program today for their comments. Tom.
Thank you. I think this was a highly publicized and very unfortunate instance that arose out of the Los Angeles City Council, but it is merely indicative of a deep and abiding problem in the United States. Stanford University did a study of racism in America, and it came out with results that indicated, in their words, that racism is a deeply American problem. Doesn't mean that it is a problem that is solely limited to American people, but that it is a problem that has been around a long time. It is a problem that is deep within us in places that we don't even recognize. and it comes out in ways and at times that that we don't even recognize that it does. Racism is not disliking or mistreating someone on the basis of their race, their skin color, their ethnicity. That's bigotry. Okay? Racism is a hierarchy. Racism is a system of advantage. And those of us who have always benefited and whose families have always benefited from the racism of the past, from the bigotry of the past, are at a different place in the power structure of this nation. And it continues. It continues, going back to that Stanford study, they found it continues because we continue to hang around our own kind. We don't like or we don't tend to want to mix as much as we might. It is also sustained by the power to legislate at all levels, from local to national. And therefore it is sustained by the very hierarchy that it is. So one does not have to say things or do things like these city council members in Los Angeles were caught on tape saying or doing. One does not have to do anything at all to be racist. Indeed, passivity is one of the features of the ongoing and deep and abiding racism in this nation. And it is a spiritual problem. It is one that we here on this panel have as much to say about as anybody else.
Thank you. Thank you. Mel.
Yes. In a way, I don't know where to begin. I spend a lot of time talking about and writing about racism and racial issues, especially between blacks and whites in the Pentecostal world. And there is racism there. There has been for a century, over a century. But the fact is, none of us is born a racist. None of us. We're all taught to be racist. And then we can choose to agree with that or choose to disagree with that. So it becomes a choice that we make. Will I be a racist or won't I? Can I hide that racism or will I put it out in the open? Racism requires the ability to make a decision, to, in a sense, take that decision against another individual and put it into a policy through the power that we have. Whatever that policy is, even if it's only a personal policy, this is the way I'm going to treat this person. And I've certainly been in a line in a Latino area where 20 people might be in this group trying to get to the counter. I'll be the last one that's served because there is this ability to distinguish that I'm not one of the community and therefore, but I've also experienced it way more frequently when I'm in a community of white folk and somebody of color comes along and so forth. So, we have a huge problem. What are we going to do about this problem? How do we look at that? Well, about a year and a half ago, we woke up in the morning to find a plastic bag at our front door with some rocks. They had obviously tossed it, and in it was anti-Semitic material. So what are we supposed to do about this? Where did this come from? We don't know anything about this. So we called the local police and they said, yep, it's a problem. They only hit 3 neighborhoods last night, and now I hear that they've hit more neighborhoods. And then of course, after this thing with the city council, they've been putting up posters on bridges overlooking freeways and so forth. It's really been a very, very difficult situation. I do not understand anti-Semitism. I do not understand racism. I do not understand anti-Black or anti-Latino or anti-Asian kinds of actions that are going on in Los Angeles all the time, and they are rampant. And I don't think LA is alone. I'm quite sure it's not alone. Otherwise, we would have had some huge changes that we haven't had. We really haven't looked at racism since the early 60s, when Lyndon Johnson was in place, and what we were trying to do was to make sure that black folk got to vote. Now we're finding that trickling away. No, it's being stripped away by those who want to, in a sense, set up a first-class, second-class thing. Every place it comes, we have to stand against it.
Good. Dan?
So in April of 2018, two African-American men went into a Starbucks in Center City, Philadelphia, because they were going to have a business meeting there. And one of them wanted to use the restroom. And the manager said only customers can use the restroom. So he was not happy with that answer, but he went and sat down. And the next thing you know, the manager had called the police, and the two men were being arrested for trespass. And then the person came, happened to be a white person that they were going to meet with, and said, what happened here? And it became this enormous thing. And I always think of that example because when we talk about structural racism, we're talking about what happened in the life of the manager of that restaurant in the course of her 30-some-odd years on the planet that influenced her. What did she see on television? What did she experience in her own life, in school? What she saw in the movies, or all the different influences that led her to see two young African-American men as a threat, as a danger that required her to call the police because she felt afraid. And I think until we understand what we are doing as a society that teaches people to judge others on the basis of the most exterior of characteristics, we're going to continue to have a problem with race in America. Isabel Wilkerson writes in her phenomenal book, Caste, and if you haven't read that book, you should read it. If you've read it, read it again. That race is a completely fabricated way of looking at a human being. She writes in her book something fascinating, that a person came from Africa and said, you know, until I came to the United States, I didn't know I was black. In Africa, there are no black people because that's not how they judge people. Now, they might say you're from this tribe, or you're from that tribe, or you're from this society, or that society, this country, or that country, but race is of no interest to them. It's an American thing. It's a new thing. And I think until we figure out how we deal with that, we're going to continue to see it as part of our society. And not just racism. There are all kinds of other bigotries that are being allowed to fester in society, where you have people like Kanye West or Kyrie Irving who are saying, I'm going to go DEFCON 3 on the Jews, or I'm going to tweet a link to a pseudo-documentary that purports that the Holocaust was a fabrication. So long as we tolerate within our society the ability to look at somebody and not see them as fully human, or to use an artificial demarcation to try to shunt someone into a particular category, our society is going to fail. But you asked, how do we deal with this? I remember many, many years ago, it's probably 25 years ago, there was an anti-Semitic event in Bozeman, Montana. During the Hanukkah festival, it's customary to put the lights of the Hanukkah, the Hanukkah menorah, in the window. And someone had thrown a rock through the window with anti-Semitic scrawl. And how did they deal with that in Bozeman, Montana? The newspaper printed a full-page Hanukkah menorah and said to everybody, put this in your window so we can stand in solidarity with the Jewish people. And the vast majority of the citizens of Bozeman, if they weren't already Jewish, had a newspaper menorah in their window. And it was a statement to all those that said, you want to hate? You're not among us, and we reject that. And it made a difference. And I think that we need to do what we can to stand in solidarity with people to say we're going to try to break down the structures that convince someone to see someone as a threat when they know nothing about them solely by what greets the eye, or because of a conspiracy theory, or because of a bigotry that was passed from generation to generation.
Thank you. Carl.
Yeah, all this is right in tune with what I've been thinking about for the last couple of weeks, because I attended a Lilly conference. It's a Lilly Fellows Conference. It's for church-related schools in the United States, institutions of higher education. And the theme of the conference was implicit racial bias in the academy. And we had 3 black speakers, and all 3 black speakers said, in essence, they didn't say it in this way, but I'm going to put a point to it, and that is, it's only, a bunch of white people who can put together a conference that says implicit racial bias in the academy, because if you're black, it's explicit. It's actually very obvious who it's hidden to are white people. And it was a powerful conference. It made me rethink a lot. And the first speaker, Eddie Glaude, who's head of African American Studies at Princeton, he was the first speaker, and he said that we have a value gap in America, and he puts it this way. He said, here's the value gap. White people matter more than other people. And this is repeated over and over. He went through then a list of even current events in which this is demonstrated. And, again, I don't think it's like this explicit desire to be racist. It's just that we don't think in terms of, let's say, curriculum. So this is academics. We're discussing curriculum. How many of our faculty choose books that are written by African American authors versus white authors? Because our black students see that all the people who they're learning from are white authors. And what does that suggest? If their teachers are white and the authors are white, that education is the vestige of white people, right? And so you realize that there are these really subtle markers that reinforce the system that whiteness matters and blackness doesn't. And again, it's not intentional, but I began to think about my own history classes thinking, whose narrative am I teaching? I mean, I'm trying to be broad, but really I'm maybe not as broad as what I think I am. And so it was a challenging conference. It was very popular. It's interesting you mentioned Kanye West, because one of the speakers mentioned this. I thought you'd find this interesting, Dan. Said that when he got up and he had a line of clothes that that said "White Lives Matter," and the African American woman who was speaking said, "That is hate speech." And it's interesting that no one took him to task on that. Yeah. But when he made anti-Semitic remarks, then all of a sudden everyone's up in arms. And I don't think she's trying to say, one's more or less important, but it's interesting how we ignore certain kinds of racism against blacks, and that we as white, as in the academy anyway, have to be aware of that. And the last thing is that they talked about radical. It's interesting that you have here roots, rooted out, because the root is radix in Latin, right? Meaning where we get the word radical. And so one of the themes of the conference is we need a radical transformation. And of course, a lot of them were Christian. They all were Christian in background, and they called on the prophetic tradition of Christianity to begin to encourage us to speak in the prophetic liberationist voice. It's powerful.
Thank you. Mel, I'd like to pick up a question, something you said in your opening comments. You also said something about we're not born racist, but there's a point at which we make a choice.
Yes.
Do you think, well, probably the question to everyone, is there a point when we actually do make a choice? Or do you think that people move into this without understanding what is happening to them?
Well, I think it's a both and. I mean, I think that there are places where we explicitly make choices. I remember when my oldest son recognized one of my best friends who was an African American, and we were in a grocery store line, and he turned and he looked at Bill and he said, "He's not white." And I thought, where the cotton pick did that come from? But he's obviously picked it up someplace in the culture, Our pastor tried to address it by using 2 eggs, and he took a brown egg and he took a white egg, and he had all the kids come down. And he says, "What do you think? This one's a brown egg and that's a white egg. Are they different?" "Yeah, they're different." Then he cracked them both, put them in a bowl, and said, which one's the brown egg and which one's the white egg? You see, inside we're all the same. We're all human. That's what it's about. So I think you can teach it very young, and people will understand. Kids will understand. But there is this much more subtle and insidious systemic racism that we inherit in ways that we don't even see until it hits us in the face. I can walk through a dark alley at almost any place. I can go into any town because I'm white. But don't let a black guy do that in my town.
Right.
That's
that's
scary. See, that's scary.
That's the sort of thing that
Exactly.
Carl was talking about when he was talking about only
Yeah.
only a bunch of white
Yeah.
scholars could say that it's implicit bias when really all of us know it's explicit. Yes.
Thank you. Let's have a break.
We hope you're enjoying today's program. If you'd like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the vision and history of the program, and we invite you to become a ministry partner, explore our Town Hall Estates healthcare facilities, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, we look forward to receiving your letters. You may write us at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. If you have a prayer request, please send it to prayerrequest@americanreligious.org. Thank you for writing and thank you for watching. Now, back to today's closing statements.
Welcome back, friends, to today's topic, and we're going to move straight into our closing comments.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I want to move from racism to anti-racism and suggest that there are some things that we can do to begin to unseat this stuff within ourselves. Number one, we can challenge overt racism where we see it, because not only for what that does for the other person or the person being discriminated against, but for what that does inside us. We can educate ourselves about the baked-in racism that we're just a part of, and then we can be proactive by intentionally mixing, sharing, listening to each other, and yes, paying special attention to the special needs of the particular needs of groups that have long been discriminated against.
Thank you. One of the themes at this conference that I drew out of it, because again, it was a group of Christians speaking, was that we as a nation have to grow up and stop telling stories of our own innocence. And that we have to tell the truth to one another. And that, as always, the answer typically in the religious traditions are one needs to repent. That one needs to, you can't repent of something you deny that you were involved in. But the path to healing is always starting with the truth. And then telling the truth requires a maturity and then a conversion, right, to a new awareness. And of course, this conversion, I think, is not just a one-time event. It's an ongoing event in our lives, but it's again being made aware, because if there's no awareness, there's no change. And so how is it that we can become more aware of this explicit and implicit racism that we swim in?
Thank you.
In 1994, I was invited to a conference in Memphis, Tennessee, that was going to address the issue of racism within Pentecostal circles. And I was given the joy of giving the opening plenary address, which basically said, "We are racist." I debated about how to do that because it was a number of different denominations that were present, and I thought, I could make a general thing, but it would be meaningless. Wouldn't have anything for anybody. But I wanted to stick a pin in, or a knife, or whatever, in to make the point. So I took my own denomination, and I showed all the ways that we had been racist over the last 80 years. I got in trouble. I got in trouble with my people. And there was one guy that began to build a file on me, and we had 15 years of discussion back and forth because it was so painful His daddy wasn't a racist. He never owned any slaves, you know. But that's because he didn't understand the nature of racism. It's so incipient. It's so present in our culture. And in the South in particular, which is where our denomination is headquartered, it's a real problem. So it comes sometimes to opening this wound is sometimes extremely painful. Sometimes you'll pay a price for it. But I can tell you this, it is worth it, because my denomination has changed. And over the last, since 1994, I think we have upped our black membership from about 10% to about 35%. And that's a huge increase, you know, which took care of and takes care of them in large numbers, even at the top executive levels. I'm really proud of that. But it was very painful.
And just to pick up on that very, very briefly, in order to remedy and root out racism, it's going to require a change where people who are used to enjoying privilege and power are going to have to cede some of that privilege and power, and that's very dangerous and very difficult and very threatening. And we're going to have to figure out ways where we can try to achieve better equity and to root out racism in ways that don't provoke a backlash because of the threat of what that reality is going to require.
Thank you. And I think in closing, I would like to refer back to our program that we've just recently had, which is about curriculum and teaching, and how we need to start teaching about realities and truth early on in children's lives, because until it becomes so embedded in their thinking that racism just isn't there. I think once that happens, it's much harder to break. You know, I say a very difficult topic today, but I think one that I think is really important for all of us to get hold of, because I think if we're honest, we've got to say, yes, racism is there. It's alive and well, too alive and too well. And it's only as everyone is willing to confront it realistically that we can do something about it. So thank you all for the great conversation. The Charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American rights to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. So now, friends, until next week, the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.